Hi, and welcome to the Neoprene Playmat. I'm your host, Matt Piak. This segment is called Laying It All Out, and this is essentially where I take a topic in the board game industry and I lay it all out. I talk about all the odds and ends of different things that are taking place. I grab a topic and I try and explore it as fully as possible. And so today, what I wanted to touch on is essentially when is it okay to start calling a game of the year? So, as you may or may not know, 2020 is coming to an end very shortly. This means there's going to be a ton of content creators that are putting out their top games from 2020, whether it's top 10, top 5. Maybe it's just one, and they're calling something the game of the year. They're putting some sort of award or seal on it. Additionally, you'll find in the forums a lot of people are talking about, well, what was your favorite game this year? What was the best release? And so I kind of wanted to take this topic, break it down, and look at kind of each area specifically. To begin with, for the individual, the person that is just in the hobby and just enjoys playing games, how many plays do you need of a game to call it the game of the year? Um, to give it that ranking, right? And then the other thing is, how many games from 2020 do you have needed to play in order to say that this was the game of the year, right? Like, you need some form of criteria to put it up against. I would think, because if you play any one game from 2020 and you don't play any other games from 2020, it's going to be your game of the year. It's the only thing that you have any sort of way of evaluating. And so, as I began thinking, on the personal level, I don't think it matters much. It's all subjective. I do personally. I always get mad in the forums when people are commenting on games or ranking games they've never played before. I just don't think it's fair. It almost creates a sort of board game tribalism. Um, in that, like, people pledge their allegiance to certain games because of how they're received by the people around that game, rather than actually participating and enjoying it and then going from there. That said, it's the internet. Don't trust anything. Yada yada. All the typical stuff, right? But that said, I really think you only need to play a game once to know whether or not you liked it as a good game. But to call a game of the year, I feel like it needs a little bit more behind it, right? It needs not only that you liked it, but that you wanted to get it back to the table and you actually found ways to get it back to the table. If a game is good enough, it should be creating, or you should be creating opportunities to make that game happen. And so for me personally, I would say the individual at home should have probably played, I don't know, 3 times maybe before they can start claiming it. Once again, it's completely subjective criteria. You can play it once, you can play it no times at all and claim that. But where I'm sitting at, if you could get a couple different player counts in and play it, 3, 4, maybe 5 times, that is, I would think, enough to say this. You could say this is by far my favorite game this year. That said, the other question now comes in: how many games from the year do you need to play to make that claim? Do you play? Is it just one? Is it two? If you've played 2 games from 2020, can you say this is the game of the year, even though you haven't played all of the other stuff? Once again, subjective. You totally can. But for it to be kind of credible, for you to have some form of database to go against, I would probably put the bar right around 15. Obviously, thousands of games come out every year, and so whenever you make a subjective claim like game of the year, it's never going to be completely what's the word I'm looking for? It's not foolproof, right? There's no way you could play every game. The reviewers out there like Tom Vassell doesn't get every 2020 title played, or any of the cast from Man vs. Meeple, or like all these big hitters, Tantrum House, all these guys that get shipped tons and tons of games to review and whatnot. They're not able to play every single game that comes out for the year, and they usually make it pretty clear on their channel. So most individuals that aren't getting games shipped to them for reviews and things of that nature aren't going to be able to either. There's just not enough resources, right? So I think at the personal level, if you've played maybe even 10 to 15, to me that seems like a reasonable amount. It's you've played maybe one new game a month, right? If you hit right at that 12 spot, you can say, hey, this was the game of the year for me. This outranked the other 11 games I played. And I think that's good. I think that's an area where the individual has enough experience to really kind of make that claim and be proud of whatever game came out on top, right? Um, but then it's a whole different thing when you are a major reviewer or content creator that for a living. Like, I'm talking the full time people. I'm not talking like myself who does this just for fun on the side. I doubt any publishing company even knows who I am. Or, the guys that just play games for fun and do playthroughs and things. Like, that's not the group I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that, put the awards on the box, the people that say, oh, this was Dice Tower's selection for Game of the Year. This is, this made it to the top 10 of Man versus Meeple or things like that. These people are playing. Like, Jeremy Howard just commented on a post earlier. He said he played well over 200 titles for 2020. That's the type of thing I'm talking about now. And so how many plays does it take for someone that's doing that to say, oh man, this is the game of the year? And that becomes a very, very difficult question. One, they play so many games. If you're playing over 200 games from a specific year, that means you don't have time to replay games all the time. You don't have time to keep getting it back to the table because you have to get new games to the table because that's the line of work you're in. And so I think the mark stays about the same for the number of plays, right around that 3 to 5 area. If any content creator that is playing over 200 games a year is getting this thing to the table 3, 4, 5 times, that means a lot. And this becomes tricky because there's different genres, right? Like, if I was to pull out Point Salad or Love Letter, we could get that to the table so many times in such a short time. Whereas a large campaign game or a game that takes 3 to 4 hours to play, you might only need 2 to say, man, this really does it for me. If you're a content creator, you also have to realize they play so many games that they have a certain level of expertise around the subject matter. And so in a lot of ways, that allows them to kind of drill down and get an understanding of what a game is doing quicker too than the average individual. As I've grown in this hobby and played more games, the more games I play, the better I get at learning the games and teaching the games. And when you're playing just the massive amounts they are, I imagine it's easier to figure out how strong a game is after even fewer plays. That said, though, how many games do they need to play in order to call something game of the year, right? Now this is something totally different. This isn't a subjective opinion you're throwing at. I mean, it's subjective. I shouldn't say it's not a subjective opinion. This isn't just a random opinion you're throwing out onto some forum page. This isn't necessarily a joking matter because your choices could have impacts for the sales of the games. And so how many games do you need to play before you deem something game of the year, your number one game of 2020? And in this bit, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted my answer to be. I know content creators play tons and tons of games, and I don't know that there's a finite number of like you have to hit this number in order to do it. But if people are throwing stickers on a box saying it's game of the year, I feel like it needs to have some sort of competition. And so I would say you'd have to at least play 50 games throughout the course of the year. That's a little bit more than 4 a month, which, I mean, if you look at the amount of content out from each of those major channels, each of those groups that are doing this full time, they easily play 4 different games in a month, if not more. And so I would say probably most of them are playing more than that. And so when you start looking at it from that lens, maybe 50 is not even enough. Maybe it's more like 100 games, right? That's doubling down on that. That's like 10 games a month. It's a little bit less, so it's like, I don't know, nine games a month, somewhere in there, 9 to 10 games a month, depending on the month, right? And so um, that then makes it a lot easier for you to make this claim. Although there's thousands of games coming out there, and you could always make the disclaimer, hey, we haven't played everything, we don't know everything that's out there. This is the best we can do with what we've been provided. There's a large amount of data behind that game of the year. And once again, it's a subjective opinion. So at the end of the day, does it really matter if so-and-so labeled it game of the year? Probably not. But if you're putting that sticker on the box, at least for me, I want to know that this has been battle tested. This is something that's been, I'm ranking this above all of these games. And maybe I don't agree with that after playing it, but at least I see the amount of work and effort that went into claiming something as game of the year in that context. And so for me, at the end of the day, I think I want to settle on the number 100, which is actually what Jeremy Howard told me. He said that he would feel comfortable doing a game of the year after 100. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've sat back and really reflected on things. That seems about right to me too. Not that I don't know that I've ever played 100 titles in a single year, but I also don't have the privilege of marking something down as game of the year. But as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about the amount of content that's out there surrounding board games. To me, that sounds like the right number. At least 100, if not more. Heck, if you could hit 500, I don't think anybody will. Maybe somebody at the Dice Tower, maybe somebody at Man vs. Meeple, maybe Rado. Rado plays a lot of games. He usually has like 20 games that he's done per month, somewhere close to there. So I don't know what the exact number is, or if there even should be an exact number. Once again, this is subjective, but for me, I want to know that there's some credibility to what's being said. I want to know that the games that are getting these labels aren't games that are just the hype, that are just have the largest market share, right? There's certain games that are going to hit more people's tables simply because of their distribution. I look at a lot of the Target releases. Those have gotten more play than a lot of the stuff that's only sold at the FLGSs because of how accessible it is. All that Prospero Hall productions that are going through Funko right now with or Ravensburger is who they used to be associated with. So you have, like Disney Villainous, you have Jaws, you have heck, even Cephalo Fair Games got in on it with the Jaws of the Lion Gloomhaven game. And so there's these almost mass market games too that have a wider spread. And like my hope is that these games don't end up getting marked game of the year simply because they had more market share, right? My hope is always that the best games get labeled as such. And even if they're not the best games for me, that they're the best games for the most amount of people, right? I guess it's a little bit of a utilitarian ethic here. But with that said, what are your thoughts? How many plays does someone need before they can claim game of the year? And how many plays of that game do they need before they can call it such, to say this is the best game? Is that just a one shot? I've played it once, I just know in my heart that this is the game? Or is it something that's more methodical, something like, I've played this 3 and 4 times, I'm still discovering new strategies, I'm still finding new pathways, this game is amazing and it's intriguing and I want more and more and more? What are your thoughts? Let me know down below. As always, thanks for joining and have a wonderful night.